Hey guys, today I'm here to do my April reading wrap up and I'm actually pretty impressed with myself because I somehow managed to read 6 books in the month of April. However, I want to start with a book that I read in March because I only read this one book in March and I didn't see the point of wrapping it up, but I do want to talk about it now, and that is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a novel about a middle-aged butler named Stevens living and working in England directly after World War II. And I will say that I enjoyed it. I am a big fan of the style of Ishiguro's writing, so that kind of I think was most enjoyable for me. But I did do a full review on this. If you would like to see that, I will link it in the description box, but I think I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Moving into what I read in April, I started off the month by finishing up an ebook that I had randomly picked up in December, I believe, and I'm just gonna have to read the title because it's kind of long, but it is The Path of the Ninja, the definitive translation of the Shoninki by Anthony Cummings and Natori Masazumi. So yes, this is a very, very random read, and no, I can't actually remember why I picked it up, but it basically talks about the philosophy behind being a ninja and infiltration and stealth and what you should wear and how you can trick others into believing that you are somebody else. And I thought it was really cool that the translator, Anthony Cummings, actually inserts little kind of like mini prologues before each chapter and kind of talks about how some of this stuff is still applicable in our modern life, and I don't know, I thought that was very interesting, and again, I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I listened to an audiobook, and that was My Beloved World by Sonia Sotomayor. I touched on this briefly in my April favorites video, but Sotomayor is one of the current justices on the US Supreme Court, and what I like about her, what I find inspiring about her, is that she is not only a Latino, but she is also a woman, and therefore, she has some very interesting stories about overcoming lots of struggles, whether she's talking about growing up as a kid in the Bronx to immigrant and undereducated parents, or her struggles coming up through the legal profession as a minority woman, all the way up to her first appointment as a US federal judge. Obviously, I found her story very, very interesting, very compelling. I loved her writing style. It was very logical. You could see her lawyer brain, and the fact that none of the instances that she brought up or none of the relationships that she focused on were out of place. They all actually were very important. Nothing seemed like she was just throwing it in there to have it in there. She really seemed to present a very cohesive story of her life, and I found it very, very compelling and very inspiring, and I actually gave this one 5 stars. I would actually also really recommend the audiobook if you prefer to consume nonfiction that way. I know I do. Sotomayor herself narrates the introduction and prologue, which I thought were fantastic, and then the woman who reads the rest of the novel, I can't remember her name, but she does a fantastic job for the rest of the novel. Moving on to some physical books, I read a poetry collection, which was The Palace of Contemplating Departure by Bryn Saito, and I actually read this for my Asian American author recommendations video, which should have gone up before this one, and I actually really enjoyed this. I don't normally read poetry. I don't ever really want to read poetry, but I wanted to read this before that video so that I could definitively recommend it or not, and I actually did enjoy this. There were quite a few poems in here that really stood out to me as very interesting, and if you're into poetry, I would suggest that you check her out. I also gave this one 3 stars on Goodreads, but that's kind of my baseline, and I honestly gave it 3 stars because I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to either say yay or nay on poetry. So yeah, there's that. Next, I read South of the Border, West of the Sun by Haruki Murakami, and this was actually my first book, technically-ish, of the Dewey's 24-hour readathon. I read, I believe, 100 pages of this to start the readathon off and finish this novel. This novel follows Hajime, who is a middle-aged Japanese man with a seemingly happy life. He is the owner of 2 different bars, he's got a loving wife, 2 beautiful daughters, and yet he has this extreme hole in him, or he's this very listless character that just doesn't seem quite satisfied with life. I kind of hate to make this broad generalization because I've only actually read 2 Murakami novels now, but from what I gather, Hajime is kind of Murakami's typical protagonist in that he is fairly successful in life yet unsatisfied, and he feels like something's missing, but he doesn't exactly know what, and he doesn't exactly know how to go about achieving that missing something. The plot of this novel is fairly simple. It follows Hajime's life from the time he is about in middle school up through his midlife encounter with a middle school classmate who was both mysterious and intriguing, named Shimamoto. I really enjoyed this novel, and I'm actually thinking of doing its own separate review video because I did enjoy it so much. I felt like Hajime could have been really annoying if it had been anybody else who had written this novel, but Murakami's writing is absolutely beautiful. Something about it is just so captivating to me. I just really, really liked it. I think this is a good book for anybody who's only ever read Norwegian Wood to read, because there's not, I mean, there's a slight hint of magical realism in here, but not really. It's more of an eerie feeling. So it's more similar to Norwegian Wood than his other novels, and I don't know, I would highly suggest this, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Unfortunately, the day of the readathon was also the first day of my reading period, aka the frantic period of studying before finals, and I also had a family dinner that I forgot about, which ended up taking about 4 or 5 hours, which I was not expecting. So when I got home, I wanted to pick something up that was really light and super easy to get through, just to get some pages through. So I went with Eastman and Laird's Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Volume 5. And I have to say I was fairly disappointed in this. I obviously wasn't expecting fantabulous plot lines or anything, but I wasn't a fan of most of the art. There are 4 different issues in this bind-up, and the first story in particular, I just really was not a fan of the artwork. I don't know if that's going to come across on camera, but it was very, like, scratchy and just kind of sloppy looking and unfinished, and I'm not really a fan of that style. However, the 3rd and 4th story had much better art, and I particularly liked this spread from the 3rd story. I definitely am a fan of more traditional comic book art, so I like that one. Overall, it was alright. It was kind of fun and definitely easy. I flew through it in about like 45 minutes, and I gave this one 2 stars. And then the last book that I read in both the month and the readathon was Ranger's Apprentice Ruins of Gorlan by John Flanagan. I've already talked about this middle grade fantasy series forever and always on this channel, so I won't go too much into it right now. Just suffice it to say that I absolutely loved it. I actually forgot how good the writing is and how much it really doesn't feel like middle grade fiction. It feels like it leans more towards adult fiction. Like the words he uses and just the way he describes things don't feel like middle grade to me at all. I also forgot that Will, the protagonist, is actually 15. For some reason in my head he was 12, but he's actually 15, and I do think that he read a little young, and I'm not sure if that's just because I always thought he was 12 or if that's actually because he was written younger. But I definitely enjoyed this, and I forgot how funny it was as well. There were definite parts that had me laughing out loud, not because it was trying too hard to have a comic relief character, but simply because the situations were actually funny. So if you have younger siblings, or if you are into really easy to read, engaging fantasy, I would highly, 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 highly suggest this, and I gave it 4 stars. So these are all of the books that I managed to read in March and April, and I'm very happy with this number. I've actually finally pretty much caught up to my reading challenge. I think for the first time in ever, I'm either ahead or I'm on schedule. So that's really exciting. Anyways, I hope you guys had a great reading month yourselves. Let me know maybe what your favorite book of the month was. For me, it was definitely My Beloved World. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a great day. I will talk to you next time. Bye! Broad generalism.